Don't hang up that phone. We've found what you're looking for. Welcome to the Let's Talk Cabling Podcast with Chuck Bowser, RCDD. Well, seeing how we're pulling Category 6A, the most powerful twisted pair in the world, you gotta ask yourself this one question. Did I pull 295 or 300 feet? Well, do you feel lucky? Do you, punk? What exactly does RCDD stand for? Registered Communications Distribution Designer. Just the expert you need to ensure your cable plant performs exactly as designed. The elite professional, knowledgeable, and experienced in leading-edge ICT design principles. Now, send the new guy to the truck for a bucket of dial tone and the cable stretchers, while you listen to an informative program on telecommunications.
Thursday night, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That can only mean one thing. After Hours Live with Chuck Bowser, RCDD, where you get to ask your favorite RCDD questions about installation, certification, design, estimation, project management, even career path. Career path, yes. But tonight's show, we are focusing on copper cable testing. Copper cable testing. Tonight's show, it's going to be a compilation of a bunch of test questions that I get all the time. Because otherwise I get answering the same things over and over and over and over and over again. It seems like I'm always doing that. Hey, if you are watching this somewhere, make sure you share it so other people, TikTok peeps, share this, LinkedIn, YouTube, all this, share it so more people can get on. More people can get on. Now, if you follow the show, you know we always start off with, what are you drinking? So put us in the chat, put in the chat box, what are you drinking? Now, you know it's an after-hour show, so you can have an adult beverage. That's allowed. It's allowed. Tonight, Chuck is drinking root beer. Again, root beer. But I'm not drinking my normal Zevia root beer because, look, it's brown. Remember, Zevia is white. So this is actually Virgil's Zero Sugar Root Beer. Virgil's Zero Sugar Root Beer. Let's see if it tastes like real root beer. Not bad. Not bad. It's not the same as tap root beer, but it's pretty stinking close. Pretty stinking close. Now, I know that you followed the show because you see the same people quite often. It costs money to put this show on. So if you don't mind, would you scan that QR code right there with your phone? You can buy me a cup of root beer. You can buy me a cup of coffee. You can even schedule a 15-minute one-on-one call with me after hours, of course. Right? Or you can just make a donation to the show. That just help the show moving on, right? Because it costs money to do the show. It just absolutely does. So now we always go to the acronym challenge. The acronym challenge. Today's acronym is going to tie in with today's subject. Today's acronym is OTDR. OTDR. What does OTDR stand for? Put the answer in the chat box. Right? Put the answer in the chat box. I'll turn on the chat overlay. There we go. So there we go. Still waiting for some people to answer. What does OTDR mean? OTDR. I got to tell you what. I got a podcast sticker for the first person who can tell me what does OTDR stand for. Boom. There it is. Think Fiber. Got it. Yes. Think Fiber. Direct message. Think Fiber. You know what, Ken? You came in right behind them. So Ken and Think Fiber. Direct message me your mail address, and I will send you a podcast sticker. Okay? So send me your email address. I mean, not your email address, your mailing address, and I will send you a podcast sticker. Okay? Oscillating time deviation report. No. There we go. So I turn on the chat box so that way we can see it. So tonight, I also do the motivational minute on my live streams. I forgot that. Now, this one came from a kind of a weird place. If you know me, Chuck likes watching YouTube. I love watching YouTube videos on RVs, full-time RVing, sailboating, homesteading. Those are my favorites. And there's this channel that I follow called Dan and Jen Nevada. Now, they haven't full-timed in a while, and they're not even putting out regular content. So I got this one from their video today. So this morning, before 8 o'clock, I'm sitting down, have my cup of coffee. They're doing their thing, and they had this sign behind them, and their sign said, "Do something today to make your tomorrow better." Do something today to make your tomorrow better. That could be anything. It could be something from like reading a book, having a conversation with a subject matter expert in a field that you want to learn from. Like, for example, knife sharpening or low voltage cabling. Watch a webinar, because the more things you learn today, tomorrow will be easier. Hey, did you happen to catch last week's show? I did a really cool show about a office locator kit. I talked to Tom Jallo from Softing, and we did about a 40 minute show. He's going to be on again. We got more stuff to talk about, so make sure that you go back and watch that show. Tom Jallo from Softing, right? Now, let me see. Brian, you know what, Brian? Email me your mail address, and I'll send you a sticker as well. There we go. So 3 people get 3 stickers. 3 people get 3 stickers. So today's question, like I said, today's content, I filled my cooler with ice, so tomorrow drinks are cold while I install cable. That's pretty smart. So tonight's episode is going to be about copper cable testing. Copper cable testing. We're going to talk about what is it, what are the things that you should find, what is a test plan, what are the things in a test plan. By the way, I'm working on a test plan that I'm going to release that you can download and use for your company to make your company better. A lot of times when you're doing proposals, they're going to ask you, what is your testing plan, right? Anthony's in the house, low volt Warby. So I'm working on a test plan, which will talk about all these things. And then I'm going to, like I said, I've lumped all of my copper cable questions into a couple categories, and we're going to talk about those tonight. So first, let's talk about what is a test plan. So a test plan is just a formal document. Technically, Web3 is in the house. It's a formalized written plan that's going to talk about how you are going to manage your testers, how you're going to maintain those testers, right? Maintain them. How are you going to keep them up to date? How are you going to make sure that if something goes bad, what's the process for fixing that? It's going to talk about training your employees. There's a novel concept for you. Train your people on how to use the testers, how to read and interpret the testers. Right? So that's another section. Another section is going to be signing out your testers, the inspection process, how to set your tester up in the field, and then finally, how to handle all those test results. Because if you're a contractor in the field, you're probably testing, 5,000 cables a year, 50,000 cables a year. Technically, Web3, I've never gotten trained, LOL. Then there are a lot of people who are really good at testing, have never gotten any formal test, any formal training. But training's never a bad thing. Never a bad thing. So you should have some type of a formal testing plan. Now, like I said, so these questions are going to be grouped into general areas. So, for example, we're going to talk about common wire map questions, common length questions, common crosstalk questions, common return loss questions, right? I'm going to be talking about the answers in generality, because fluke you might go one way to test it. AEM, you might go a different way. Softing, you might go a third different way. So I'm not going to talk specifically how to fix them with your tester, but I'll explain what they are and what are the common causes that do them. You ready? Buckle up, Buttercup. Here we go. So the first question is, what type of equipment do I need for testing category 6 cables? So that kind of really all depends, right? Really all depends, because you can certify a cable, you can qualify a cable, you can verify a cable. So it kind of depends on what it is that what you're really looking for. If you're looking for a manufacturer warranty, generally that's going to be certifying a cable. When you certify a cable, you're measuring the cable's electrical properties, comparing those to the standards, and then if it meets the standards, winner, winner, chicken dinner, rock on, you got it. Then you got qualifiers, and Tom and I talked about qualifiers. It didn't make it in the show because it wasn't part of the show subject. But that's also known as bit error rate testers, where you put actual data down the cable and you look to see if it drops any packets. And then there's verifiers. Verifiers are just simple continuity testers, looking for opens, looking for shorts, stuff like that. So it kind of depends on what it is you're trying to test. What is it you're trying to test? Now, let's talk about this. When you have a test, one of the first tests that the test is going to do is called a wire map test. It'll on the screen, it'll have 1 through 8 on one side, 1 through 8 on the other side, and have those lines going across, right? What do you do if you have an open? When you look at an open, what that means is the line has a broken spot in it. So it's not one continuous line from one side to the other. So when it has an open in it, the most likely cause is going to be you didn't terminate it with your punch down tool correctly. You got a conductor that's partially seated. You can actually go into the TDR function on your tester and find out where that short is in feet. So you can kind of find where that is. Another reason you're going to get an open in a wire map is because one of your cable got damaged during pulling. So you got a broken pair. It might have gotten pulled too hard that broke the conductor. It might have gotten run across a sharp piece of metal that cut it. Again, if you use the TDR function of the tester, it'll tell you how many feet it is from the tester's end. So you can kind of go almost right straight to it. Okay. Reverse pairs, those are simple. Reverse pairs, because you literally remember each pair has a tip and a ring. Tip and a ring, one's transmit, one's receive. And if you terminate them backwards, it's going to be a reversal. So all you do is just find out which side has the reversal, lift it out, flip it, put it back in again. Let's talk about a test that fails because of excessive length. Oh, good point. Matt Magnese says, or a staple through the jacket. Absolutely. That's an absolute good reason that'll cut a conductor. That's one of the reasons why we're not supposed to use staplers for high performance data cabling. High performance data cabling. We're not supposed to use staples because if it goes into the jacket, it can cut the conductor. If it doesn't go into the jacket, it's going to crush the cable and it might cause some crosstalk problems. We'll talk about crosstalk here in a minute, right? So getting back to the length, let's say that your tester fails because it exceeds the length limit. Now there's two types of length errors you can get. One where all four of the pair say it's too long, or you might get maybe one or more pairs that's going to be significantly shorter than the others. Let's talk about each of those. So the first one is if all four pairs are exceeding the length. Well, the most common problem is going to be your cable's too long, or somebody left too much slack, right? You're only supposed to leave in the telecom room, you're only supposed to leave down to the floor to the furthest corner plus 10 feet. But if you leave too much slack, if you got long runs, you might actually have an issue there. Now, when you start you get into a whole game changer cabling, remember, because they can go past the standards. There's a whole specific, I should do a show on that, specifically on how to test game changer cabling. I'm going to write that down. That's a good one. Game changer cabling. Game changer. I'll bring on one of the test manufacturers to talk about that one. Now, if another reason that can fail because of excessive limit is because you set the NVP up incorrectly. NVP is set up incorrectly. So what is the NVP? If you look up the Bixby ICT terminology handbook, which is free, by the way, go on Google, type in Bixby ICT field. No. ICT terminology handbook. I got the field guides in my head tonight for some reason. It's going to define NVP as the coefficient used to determine the speed of the transmission along a cable relative to the speed of light in a vacuum. And it's typically going to be expressed as a percentage. So let's say, for example, I happen to have a piece of cable right here. Let's say the NVP for this cable is 0.71. Put it over so the TikTok peeps can see it. 0.71. That means the signal travels down this cable at 71% of the speed of light in a vacuum. Okay. The speed of light in a vacuum is a known number. It's 186,282 miles a second. So it's a constant number. That's why we use it. So what that means is if you're getting that excessive length and you know that your cable is not too long, go in and see what is the NVP setup in your tester. What is the NVP setup? Now, it's generally going to be between 0.65 and 0.75. You should be able to go in there. You should be able to tell it. Then look at the type of cable that you're using. Go on their the manufacturer's website, and look up the NVP value for this. Okay? And whatever the NVP value the manufacturer says it is, update your tester to say that. That way you know that it's using the right NVP. Because you have the wrong NVP, it's pretty simple. So what it does is, the way that measures length is it sends a signal down the cable. When that signal gets to the other end, because of a mismatch of characteristic impedance, some of the energy gets reflected back. So it times it to see how long it takes to go all the way to the end and then all the way back. It takes that time and divides it in half. Okay? So now we know how long it took the signal to get from one end to the other end. We already know what the speed is, right? The speed is 0.71. So if you know the time and the speed, you can calculate the distance, right? So it's a simple math calculation. So make sure that NVP setup is set up correctly, because if it's set up incorrectly, it could report back that your cable is longer than it actually is, right? So make sure that NVP is set up correctly. Now, a lot of times what we used to do, Ed, the old tech guy's in the house. What we used to do a lot of times, if we had a project that we're talking about copper cable testing today, Ed, if you have a project, a large project that's got a couple hundred cables, you can actually field test the NVP in your tester. Now with the Fluke, I think you go to special functions. That menu, you'll find it says determine NVP or find NVP. I don't remember how to do it on the other test. I'd show you how to do it on my AEM, but right now my AEM hasn't gotten back to me yet. It's still out for calibration. So when you're testing it, right? When you set it in that NVP in there correctly, it's going to report. So it's going to set back that correct length. Now, if you have a length issue and it's one or more of the pairs, like one of the pairs is really short and the other pairs are really long, then you probably have damaged cable or bad connection. So let's talk about insertion loss. Insertion loss, we used to call it attenuation. Insertion loss is, where's my piece of cable? Here it is. Insertion loss is literally how long it takes a signal to get from this end of the cable to that end of the cable. Oh, sorry, that's propagation delay. Sorry. Insertion loss is the signal travels from this end of the cable and goes to the other end. It uses energy to get to the other side. It gets weaker when it goes to the other side. So when the tester is going to send that signal down, the remote end measures the power of that signal. It knows what it started off with, and it's going to report that back. Okay. You know, all of our test results are in decibels. Decibels. A decibel is a ratio of input power to output power. It's a logarithmic unit, which means it doesn't go. The scale is not 1, 2, 3, 4. It's 10, 20, 30, 40, so on. And sometimes it's used to measure the amplification of a signal, like if it's going through an amplifier, or the attenuation of a signal. Right. So insertion loss is how much that signal loses as it goes down through the connection points and the cable and the connectors. Now, what happens if your cable fails because of insertion loss? Okay. The first thing I would look at is, how long is that cable? How long is that cable? And that hopefully it didn't fail from the previous test. Another issue that you might run into that's going to give you a fail because of insertion loss is if you're using poor quality patch cords. Poor quality patch cords. So always use the best patch cords. That's why I tell people all the time, you really shouldn't make patch cords in the field, because I don't care how good you are. You're never going to make them as good as the person on a factory floor. Never. So poor quality patch cords. or you have an inappropriate category rating of something in the channel. For example, you might have Cat 6 cable, but a 5E connector on it. Cat 6A cable, Cat 6A connector, Cat 6 patch cord. That can also give you a problem with insertion loss. Another issue you can run into is the incorrect test. Incorrect test was selected. And also another one, too much pulling lubricant. Yes, we like to use pulling lubricant to make our job easier. But if you put in too much pulling lubricant, it's going to cause that cable to fail. Cable pulling lubricant is 97% water, 3% solids, right? And tight coils, Anthony Livart Warby says, tight coils can cause it as well. Here's something else. If your cable gets wet, it can cause high insertion loss to the point of failure. So if your cable is like in a conduit in a wet location, which is slab on grade construction, after it rains, after snow melts, the concrete absorbs that moisture. Now your cable's laying in the water. That could cause high insertion loss. Now let's talk about, somebody says, cable lubricant smells so good. Yeah. Now let's talk about near and crosstalk, far end crosstalk, power sum near and crosstalk, power sum far end crosstalk. Those are just all EMI. And I've explained EMI many times. It's an interfering source, substitutable unit, and the coupling between those two. With near and crosstalk, far and crosstalk, and the power sum crosstalks, you want a high dB value. So near and crosstalk is literally just how much, let me grab my 4-pair cable out here, is how much one pair interferes with another pair at the near end of the cable. Again, show my TikTok peeps how much one pair interferes with another pair at the near end of the cable. Far end crosstalk is the exact same thing, but at the far end. Power sum near end crosstalk is how much those 3 pair interfere with that last remaining pair at the near end, right? Again, how much those 3 pair interfere with those last remaining pair at the far end. So what can cause those? Number one, you untwisted too much during the termination process. That's why we're supposed to try to keep the pair untwisting to a minimum, 1/4 of an inch or less for Cat 6A, 1/2 of an inch or less for 5E or 6. But the shorter the better. Now that doesn't mean you can only strip back 1/4 inch. You can strip off 2-3 inches, but when you put it in the jack, from where it exits the jack, you should not untwist those pairs more than 1/4 of an inch. So poor untwisting is your common one. Now near crosstalk is going to happen within the first 60 feet of the cable typically. Another thing that causes near and crosstalk failures is, again, poor quality patch cords. There's that poor quality patch cords again. Always use good quality patch cords. Another problem can happen is damaged cable. So who was it? Somebody on the TikTok feed, I can't remember who it was, said stapling the cable. Yes, if you staple the cable, you are crushing the jacket. You're bringing those pairs closer together. They can start interfering with it again. So that's why we really shouldn't be stapling high-performance data cable. But that's only one. That's why we really should think about our bundle sizes. So with our bundle sizes, I think in the Bixie field guides, it tells us 24 cables or less. 24 cables or less. Yes, I'm going to talk about that in just a second, ma'am. And one of the reasons for that is for PoE, power over Ethernet. But another reason for this is if you get bigger than 24 cables in a bundle and you're laying it on cable tray, the cables on the bottom are going to get crushed. And if the cables are getting crushed, then the pairs are going to be put closer together. That's going to give you a near and crosstalk failure. And who was it said that? SBAM 250 said zip ties. Yes, absolutely zip ties can cause a problem. You don't want a zip tie looking like, grab my demonstration example out of here. I'll show you my people. Notice that tie wrap is so tight, it is crushing the jacket. It is so tight, it is crushing the jacket. I guarantee if I were to test them cables, they would fail because of crosstalk. Guarantee it. Bad connectors. So when you get a fail because of near crosstalk or far in crosstalk, the best thing to do is just cut both ends off and re-terminate it. Now, you might get a star pass, a star fail. The star indicates that it's within the accuracy limits of the tester. It doesn't really know if it's barely a pass or barely a fail. It doesn't really know. The debate always is how many star passes or how many star fails can you accept? I would never accept a star fail. So that really lives with the question, how many star passes can you accept? I've seen projects with 10,000 cables tested without a single star pass. I have seen other cable projects with 50, 100 star passes. Near end means it's near the controller end. Yes, on some testers. Some of the testers now, they're both master testers. So whichever one is conducting the test, it's on that side, within 60 feet of that. Very good, SPAM. Now you have your attenuation crosstalk ratio far end, power sum attenuation crosstalk ratio far end. Those literally are not tests. They're not tests. They're calculations based on the near end, the far end, and the power sum crosstalks. If you have an issue with one of those two tests, go back up and look in your near end and your far end crosstalks. Fix that issue, because if you do, then the issues with the attenuation crosstalk ratio far end and the power sum attenuation crosstalk ratio far end will go away for you. Some things are going to cause those kinds of errors, right? Service loops. So your service loop is too big, right? Service loop is too big. Return loss. So return loss is just the characteristic impedance for 4-pair balanced spare cabling is 100 ohms, plus or minus 5%. So this cable might be 99 ohms. The connector is also rated to 100 ohms, plus or minus 5%. So it might be 101 ohms. There's a difference between those two. So when that signal gets to that connector, because of that difference, some of the energy gets reflected back. So the measurement is how much of that signal comes back to the originating points. Again, you want a big dB number. So what are some of the things that can cause return loss fails? Okay. Bad installation practices. Okay. You bought a patch cord that wasn't rated for 100 ohms. Patch cords were damaged. And then service loops. We always tell, don't do those small little service loops, do the extended loops or figure eights. If you do a small service loop, it will show up quite often as return loss. As return loss failure. Return loss. Question from TikTok coming in. Let me see. Chuck, where is it? Thoughts on RJ45 connectors? I got lots of thought on RJ45 connectors. Lots of thoughts. I don't like the pass-throughs. It's kind of funny you say that, because I just did a show with Blake from Simply RJ45. I did have that box of the connectors sitting here. These people. I just had them on the show. And we talked about pass-through connectors. I'm not a big fan of pass-through connectors. I'm not. I know a lot of people out there love pass-through connectors. I get it. But if you say that you don't like pass-through connectors, there's some people out there that will just say, "Oh, that's because you're old school. You're old. You don't." Blah, blah, blah. No, I've just seen a lot of pictures of pass-through connectors that have been plugged into a PoE power sourcing equipment and shorted out and burnt up. And that's a safety thing for me. Right? Another question in Chuck, can you talk about MPTL testing? Okay, MPTL testing, modular plug terminated link. Now, if you have a building automation device, like a security camera, an access control point, you are allowed to crimp the end on the cable using a RJ45 and plug it right into the device. Now, how do you test that? You test that by using a permanent link adapter on one side and a patch cord adapter on the other side. I'll say that again. A permanent link adapter on one side and a patch cord adapter on the other side. You notice I didn't say channel adapter? It's a patch cord adapter. They're different. A patch cord adapter, the measurement starts in front of that RJ45. the channel adapter, the measurement doesn't start until it gets until the other side of that adapter. So with a patch cord adapter, you're measuring the connector. With a channel adapter, you're not. And that patch cord adapter has to match the category rating of the cable. So if it's a Cat 5e cable, it has to be a Cat 5e patch cord adapter. If it's category 6, it's got to be a category 6 patch cord adapter. Right? Category 6 patch cord adapter. Somebody said something about Dutch root beer. Yes. Pennsylvania Dutch root beer is the best. Okay, any final questions before I sign off? Because we're at our 30 minutes already. Gosh, that 30 minutes went so fast. Since we're on Crosstalk and RJ45 passed through, RJ45 allegations, how exposed the tips are safe, especially with PoE applications. I just talked about that. Not a big fan of the PoE. Now, there are some that have a little bar that goes, a plastic bar that goes in front of them. Beard of knowledge, make sure you go back and listen to my full episode, I think it was 2 weeks ago, where I talked to Simply RJ45, and we talked about pass-through connectors and the standard ones. So make sure that you go back and listen to that. And even they kind of said, yeah, the traditional ones are probably better. So I'm not a big fan of the pass-throughs. I am not a big fan of the pass-throughs. Let me see here. Chuck, love your content, what you do recently. I was one of your classes. I learned an absolute ton, and you motivated me to start expanding my knowledge. Well, very cool. Well, welcome to the live stream, my friend. Another one, running cables with string and ball or glow rods. My answer is yes. Now, my preferred method is kind of funny. The thing is I just did on this week's Name This Tool was a box of number 12 wax string. What I used to do a lot of times, I used to take that wax string, I would tape one end to the cable, and then I would throw the wax string through the ceiling, and we would pull that through the ceiling. The key is when you attach that pull string to the cable, right, you have to use a knot called a half hitch. That half hitch is what's called a biting knot. So when you do a half hitch on a piece of cable, you take the string, okay? You take the string like this. You're gonna take it, you're gonna flip it into a loop. Okay, flip it into a loop. Then you're gonna put the cable through the loop. Here, so through the loop. You put the cable through the loop, and then when you pull the two ends down, it's gonna bite onto that cable. The harder I do it with my fingers, so you can see this. Right? There's a loop. Pretend my finger's cable. The harder I pull on that, the harder it pulls on my finger. And if I keep it like this, eventually my finger's gonna turn red and fall off. Yeah, that damages the cable. That can cause a crosstalk problem. That's why if you use string, what you really should do is you should cut the entire end off that got damaged during the pulling. That's why you want to put your labels back a good distance behind that end. So that way when you cut it off, you don't run into those kinds of issues. Let me see. I caught my friend harassing some electricity. I told him it was an abuse of power. Oh, that's good. That is good. All right, here's one more question, and then we're going to cut for the night. Any tips for pulling off too much cable at both the station and the closet side out of fear of being too short? Any good guidelines to follow? Hope that makes sense. Oh, it absolutely makes sense. Here's my problem. Because I've been both an installer and an estimator. Okay, so I'm going to tell you right now, you want to leave only the amount of slack that the standard calls for, or the amount of slack that the estimator has put forth in his estimate. Let's say, for example, you don't know where the rack is going to go yet in the telecom room. So you're running the cable, so you leave enough slack to reach anywhere in this big telecom room. If the estimator didn't count for that extra slack, you will run out of cable before you run out of drops. The best thing to do and is to have a kickoff meeting. Now, when I say a kickoff meeting, because some people, technicians in the field, they may not necessarily have access to an estimator, but you can certainly call them up and talk to them over the phone. You can Zoom with them and have a Zoom call with them and ask them how much slack was left in the job. So some tips for you is if you get a set of prints, ask them, if the prints don't show you where the location of the rack is, Ask them to show you, to put it on your drawing. Where's the rack going to go? So you know how much slack to leave. And if they don't want to do that, then say, how much slack do you want me to leave in the telecom room? And then after you ask them that, either one of those, make sure you document that conversation. If you're in my class, you know how to document a conversation because I talked about it. Document that conversation. Because I hear you, I would rather be 10 feet too long than 1 foot too short because then you got to repull that cable. But remember, if you leave too much slack, you won't have enough cable for the job either. And then you got to go buy more cable. That's always an issue. Always an issue. See, he was in my class. Documentation. That's pro tip number 1 on my list. Go to my website, letstalkcabling.com. One of the tabs says pro list. There's 146 of them there. And pro tip number 1 is document. I appreciate everybody being here tonight. So until next time, remember, knowledge